This is the scary story about the calendar.
A woman and her husband were at their house one evening
when they heard a knock on the door. They were surprised because it was pretty late and they were not expecting any visitors.
When the woman answered the door,
she found a strange man standing at her doorstep.
He introduced himself saying he was a salesman
and that he was selling calendars door to door. The woman said she didn't want to buy anything,
but the man wouldn't take no for an answer.
He kept pressuring her to buy it
until the woman yelled and told him to leave, slamming the door in his face. The next evening, the woman came home from work
and she saw something sitting on her kitchen table, and it was a calendar. She then picked it up
and noticed that one date in particular was circled with a red marker.
It was the date of her husband's birthday. When she took a closer look, she realized that the red circle
was not marker but actually blood.
Just then she heard a strange bumping noise.
It seemed to be coming from the hallway closet.
Slowly she reached out and opened the door. She then screamed in horror at what she found inside.
Her husband was hanging from the closet railing dead, and the sound she heard was her husband's feet bumping the door.
This is the scary story about the locker.
There was a kid named Kyle, and at his school people believed that there was a cursed locker.
Every time somebody had the locker, they either died or got seriously injured. But Kyle didn't believe this rumor and he wanted to prove the whole school wrong.
He then got his locker changed to the cursed one.
Everybody was calling him crazy, but he knew there was nothing wrong with it.
The first week everything was fine,
and everybody began to believe that Kyle was right. That day after school,
Kyle was driving home and saw an old lady crossing the street.
He then decided to get out of his car and help her. But when he opened his car door,
he did not see that a car was coming.
The car then hit Kyle at full speed, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down.
Kyle and everybody at school
was positive it was because of the locker. The school then restricted anybody from ever having the locker again
and made it off limits to even go near it.
This is the scary story about the wallpaper.
There was a married couple who just bought a new house.
They both had to remove the wallpaper because the previous owner papered every ceiling and wall.
They both thought it was oddly satisfying removing the wallpaper
and said it was similar when you have sunburn and peel your skin. But suddenly the wife realized something.
Under a corner section of paper in every room
was a person's name and date. Curiosity got the better of her, and that night,
she Googled the names and dates
and discovered every name was a missing person and the missing date was exactly the same it was underneath the wallpaper. The couple then notified the police
and they sent a crime scene team over to the house.
The wife then overheard them talking
and they were saying, yes, it's human.
They then came over to the wife and said,
ma'am, where is the material you removed from the wall? That wasn't wallpaper you were removing. That was human skin.
This is the creepy story about light cat eyes.
One night, a man lay dying in his bed.
His wife left him with a nurse and went into the next room to take a rest.
She sat in the dark, staring out the window into the night.
Suddenly, the woman saw bright headlights speeding up the driveway of their house. Oh no, said the wife. I don't want visitors, especially right now.
But it wasn't a car bringing a visitor. It was an old hearse, with maybe a half-dozen strange little men
hanging from the sides. The hearse stopped and the men jumped out.
The men then stared up at her. Their eyes were glowing yellow like a cat's.
The wife watched in horror as they disappeared into the house. A second later, they were back,
lifting something into the hearse.
Then they drove off in a high speed in the direction they came.
At that very moment, the nurse came into the room.
Her face was super pale, and she put her hand on the wife's shoulder
and told her that her husband had just died.
This is the creepy story about That's Right.
There was a girl who was in 8th grade and she was at a slumber party with her friends.
Her and her friends then decided to contact spirits in her friend's unfinished basement.
They were having fun and laughing
as they were trying to figure out who to summon. Then one of the girls suggested Jack the Ripper, who was a serial killer in the 1800s. One of the girls did not like that idea, and she spoke up and said no, we shouldn't summon somebody evil. Then out of nowhere from the dark corner of the basement,
they all heard a deep man's voice say, that's right, you better not.
There was no boy or man in the house. They were home alone.
They all then ran up the stairs screaming and locked the basement door behind them.
Then somebody or something began banging on the basement door,
screaming, let me out, or I'm going to kill you.
The girls then called the police,
and when they got there,
they searched the whole house and found nothing. To this day, all the girls are confused what happened
and always wonder what would have happened if they hadn't gotten out of the basement.
This is the creepy story about the 3 black nails.
There was a little girl who had a doll,
and she painted 3 of her fingernails black.
Then that night when the girl was going to bed,
she heard a voice say,
3 black nails in your parents' room.
Confused and scared,
the girl got up and went to her parents' bedroom.
When she got there,
her mom and dad were dead on the floor
with 3 long scratch marks on their back. The girl then began to panic and ran back to her room and locked the door. She then heard the voice say again,
3 black nails in your brother's room.
She then ran into her brother's room and also found him dead on the floor with 3 long scratches on his back. Suddenly the girl then heard the voice again, and it said 3 black nails coming for you.
The next day, the girl was found dead.
She had 3 long scratches on her back,
And the doll was sitting beside her with its fingernails stained with blood.
This is the scary story about the little white dog.
There was an old woman who had no family living.
Her only friend was a little white dog who went everywhere with her.
The dog loved the fireplace in the winter,
And after the old woman went to bed,
sometimes the dog would go lay down in front of the fire.
the woman did not allow the dog in the bed, but sometimes when she was frightened,
She would hang her hand off the side of the bed and let the little white dog lick it,
one night the woman was reading a newspaper in her bed
and read that a mental patient had wandered off from a nearby hospital.
and was a suspect in killing multiple people. The woman then turned off the lights and tried to go to sleep, but she was very frightened.
She then reached her hand down to where the little white dog slept.
And sure enough, a warm tongue began to lick her hand. The woman then felt safe and comfortable again and left her hand hanging there.
She then turned to her side and looked through the open door into her living room.
And there in front of the fireplace,
Was her little white dog.
gazing at the fire and wagging its tail. And down beside the bed,
Something was still licking her hand.
this is the scary story about the bedroom light.
There were 2 girls who were best friends and roommates in college.
One night they were staying up late, studying for a test they had the next day. One of the girls was pretty lazy,
And decided to stop studying and go to bed.
the other girl was a hard worker and stayed up late studying. During the night, the girl who stayed up remembered that she left one of her books in her room.
She didn't want to wake up her roommate by turning on the light.
So she snuck in and tiptoed around in the darkness. When she got in the room, she heard heavy breathing and whispered her friend's name to see if she was awake.
There was no answer.
Then the girl heard something move in the darkness. She then whispered, "Can I turn on the bedroom light?"
There was no answer.
Eventually, she found the book she was looking for.
And made her way out of the dark room. The next day in class,
The girl noticed her roommate never showed up for the test. She then got worried and went to go check on her.
when she knocked on her bedroom door, there was no answer.
So she just opened the door. She then saw her roommate dead on the floor, and written on the wall in her blood,
Was "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?"
this is the creepy story about chicken dinner.
One evening, a mother and a father were invited to a party.
They couldn't get in contact with their usual babysitter, so they contacted their next door neighbor to take care of their 6-month-old baby boy. She was an old woman, but she said yes and was happy to help.
They told her they were leaving at 8 p.m.
But when the time came,
The old woman did not show up. The husband then called her and asked her what was taking her so long.
the old woman said she forgot all about it and that she's coming over now.
When the old woman came to the door,
The mother and father were already in their car. They then gave the old lady instructions to put the baby in bed by 9 o'clock and put the chicken in the oven so it could be cooked for the next day's dinner.
at the party, the mother decided to call the babysitter.
She asked if she put the baby to bed and the chicken in the oven. The old woman said she forgot and she's going to do it now.
Later, when the mother and father got home,
The mother went upstairs and checked on the baby.
but instead of the baby in the crib,
It was the uncooked chicken. Her husband then yelled,
"Honey, the old lady completely burned our chicken dinner."
"This is the creepy story about the bus driver."
There was a bus driver who worked for the county hospital.
One day he was transporting 20 mental patients to the state insane asylum. On the way there, he got thirsty.
And decided to stop at a convenience store.
When the driver got back to his bus,
He was shocked to find it empty.
every single one of the mental patients got free and escaped. Worried that he would lose his job, the bus driver came up with an idea. He drove the bus down the road.
And pulled up to the first bus stop that he found.
He then opened the doors.
And all the people waiting there got on the bus
The bus driver then took them
to the insane asylum.
and told the staff that these patients were extremely violent and had to be restrained.
It took many months before the staff of the insane asylum realized their mistake.
By that time, many of the people had actually gone insane, and to this day,
The real mental patients have never been found.
this is the creepy story about something was wrong.
One morning, a man found himself walking along a deserted street in a small town.
He had no idea what he was doing, or how he got there in the first place, or where he had been earlier. He didn't even know what time it was.
He saw a woman walking towards him and stopped her.
"I'm afraid I forgot my watch," he said with a smile. "Can you please tell me the time?" When the woman saw him, she screamed and ran away. The man was shocked. A few minutes later,
He noticed that other people were afraid of him too.
whenever they saw him,
They flattened themselves against a building or just ran away.
"There must be something wrong with me," thought the man.
He yelled for a taxi.
But when the taxi driver laid eyes on him,
He stomped on his gas and sped away.
the man thought this was crazy and couldn't figure out what was wrong. Maybe my wife could come pick me up, the man thought.
He then found a telephone and called his house.
Expecting to hear his wife's sweet voice, instead a strange voice answered. "Is Mrs. Sullivan there?" said the man.
"I'm sorry, she isn't," said the voice.
"Her husband died a few days ago in a horrible car crash,
and she's attending his funeral."
This is the creepy story about the mole.
There was a girl named Ava who kept having a reoccurring dream.
Every night in her dream, she would see a handsome boy. He would always say, "Come on, come to me, I'm waiting for you." The more she saw him, the more she fell in love with him. She then believed that this boy was her soulmate. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore and she asked him, "Who are you? Where are you? How can I find you?"
"Tomorrow at 12, said the boy, "at the entrance of the park.
You will recognize me from the mole on my face."
The next morning, Ava woke up
with butterflies in her stomach. She hurried to her friend's house and told her about the dream and begged her friend to go with her.
At 11:55, the two girls were waiting at the entrance of the park.
They stared at every boy who walked by, looking for the mole on his face. Ava then said she was going to get some ice cream, and she ran across the street.
But suddenly she got hit by a car.
Ava's friend rushed over to her body, and Ava's body was in a pool of blood, completely twisted.
The person who hit her then got out of the car.
When the boy rushed over to see if Ava was okay, Ava then recognized the mole on his face. It was the boy from her dream. Then, at exactly 12 o'clock,
she took her last breath and died.
This is the scary story about the Uber.
There was a woman who hated Ubers.
But one night she decided to take one.
So she called an Uber and waited a couple minutes. When the Uber arrived,
the woman realized that the car was very beat up and looked nothing like it did in the picture. But she ignored this and got in anyway. Everything was fine for the first 10 minutes. The driver and her were talking and laughing.
But suddenly the woman realized the car did not have an Uber sticker on the front of the windshield.
The woman then said, "Can you pull over please? I don't feel so good." The driver then said,
"I was hoping this would be easy, but I guess not."
The driver then slammed on the brakes and began grabbing and hitting the woman.
The woman got out of his grip for a second
and opened the car door and ran out.
The man then started to chase her,
but there was too many cars driving by, so he stopped and got back in his car. To this day, the woman has no idea how she survived or who the man was, and when she was asked about the experience,
she said never use Uber.
This is the creepy story about the fire eater.
There was a 43-year-old named Vlad who worked as a fire eater in a circus.
Vlad would always hold
a flammable cocktail in his mouth
so he could spit fire at a burning torch. He called it eating the fire, and the crowd always applauded. On January 23rd, 1998,
Vlad was performing a fire spitting routine,
and he accidentally swallowed some of the flammable liquid.
As he put the flaming torch in his mouth to eat the fire,
he burped. The vapors from his stomach then caught fire,
and Vlad suddenly exploded. The stunned onlookers assumed it was part of an amazing illusion,
and they started clapping.
Then, very slowly, they realized what really happened.
The explosion was so powerful that Vlad's body was blown to pieces, and they found his head in the popcorn machine.
The tragedy horrified the audience members,
and many of them required treatment for shock
following the terrible incident.
This is the scary story about funny faces.
One day, a girl was spending the night at her aunt's house
when she saw her 4-year-old cousin named April
sitting on the staircase making funny faces.
The girl then asked her, "What is she doing?"
And April said she was copying the lady with the braid.
The girl noticed that there was nobody there and then asked, "Where is the lady, April?" April then pointed to the beam at the top of the ceiling. The girl then said, "What is the lady doing, April?"
"She's making funny faces," said April.
The girl was about to go upstairs when April said something that made her stop in her tracks.
"She doesn't want you to come up the stairs," said April.
This creeped out the girl,
but she still decided to go up the stairs.
When the girl got to the top of the stairs, she froze in horror.
Standing at the top of the stairs was a creepy, ghostly woman,
smiling from ear to ear at the girl.
April then walked up the stairs
and stabbed the girl in the back with a big knife. As the girl was dying on the floor, the ghostly woman and April got down on one knee
and said, "We told you not to go upstairs."
This is the creepy story about the man in black.
Two young boys were sitting on a street bench at night.
They were talking and watching cars drive by,
when suddenly a man stopped his car in front of them. The man was dressed in black from head to toe.
He then rolled down his window and peeked his head out.
He then said, "Hey, are you boys hungry?"
Before the boys could reply, the man took his hand out of his pocket and held out some money.
One of the boys reached out and grabbed the money,
but the other boy said, "Don't take that," in a very demanding tone. The boy made his friend give the money back to the man
and then grabbed his arm and started jogging away.
As they were running away, the one boy said, "Why couldn't I take the money?" "I know you didn't see what I saw," said the other boy. "You were too focused on the money." "What did you see?" said the boy. In the back seat of that man's car,
there was a young boy tied up and bloody.
That man was trying to kidnap us. This is the scary story about the ceiling fan.
It was a very hot summer day,
and there was a brother and sister home alone. Their parents had gone over to their friend's house for the day.
The brother and sister were playing on a small trampoline
in the garage, and then they moved it up to their bedroom. However, after hours of jumping on the trampoline, the brother and sister began to get very hot
and decided to move the trampoline in their room with the ceiling fan.
After a while, they became bored and they decided to spice it up by having a competition.
They said whoever jumped the highest won.
The brother went first and he jumped as high as he could, but when he jumped
so high that he hit the ceiling fan and it cut off his head.
The sister began to scream and cry and thought that she would be blamed for this, because it was her idea to move the trampoline in there. She then superglued her brother's head back on his body
and put his corpse in his bed. When their parents got home later that day,
they went up to the boy's room to tell him they were home,
but he didn't respond.
The mother then went over to him and started shaking him violently,
making the boy's head fall off. The mother screamed in horror as her son's body lay there dead.
This is the scary story about the old man in the picture.
A kid named Jake and his mom were waiting in a doctor's waiting room.
Jake was not happy. He did not like waiting and he did not like the room. And he definitely hated the painting that was right across from him.
It was an ugly portrait of an old man.
The old man in the painting seemed to be staring right at Jake.
There was a strange look in his eyes,
and it was very disturbing. Every time Jake moved,
the old man's eyes followed him around the whole room. Jake's mom then got called to see the doctor,
and she got up and went in. Jake was now alone with the creepy old man painting, but he did not want to admit that he was scared.
He then went closer to the painting,
and he suddenly noticed something very odd.
The old man's hands were coming out of the painting, and they were long and bony with sharp nails. When his mother came out of the doctor's office, Jake was nowhere to be found.
She looked at the painting of the old man,
but he was no longer in the painting.
Jake's mother called the cops,
and when they arrived,
they figured out
that the painting of the old man was not a painting,
instead a real man standing in the opening of the wall
who kidnapped Jake.
This is the creepy story about the boy on the road.
One night, a married couple was driving down a mountain road. Suddenly, they saw a young boy step out in front of their car.
The husband slammed on the brakes, and the car came to a screeching stop.
When he looked up, the child had disappeared.
Looking outside, the couple realized their car was balancing on the edge of a cliff. If the husband did not slam on the brakes in that exact moment,
they would have driven right over the edge of the cliff
and fallen to their deaths on the rocks below.
For a few seconds, they sat in silence.
Then the wife said,
"The little boy saved us.
He must have been a good spirit sent down to warn us." There was a few more seconds of silence. Then the couple heard a child's voice behind them angrily scream,
"You were supposed to die."
This is a scary story about Halloween candy.
On Halloween night, there was a woman giving out candy all night.
As it grew darker and darker, things began to calm down. When it seemed like nobody else was going to be coming,
the woman went inside and called it a night. She was just about to turn off the porch light
when somebody knocked on the door. She thought it was too late for children to still be out, but she grabbed a handful of candy and opened the door.
There were 2 children standing on the porch,
but they weren't wearing any costumes. They were the strangest children she had ever seen.
Their skin was waxy and ghostly white, and their eyes were completely black.
And their teeth were too big to fit in their mouth. The confused woman then said, "What are you guys supposed to be, monsters?" "No," said the children.
"Tonight we are dressed as humans."
A chill ran down the woman's spine as she shut the door.
The children began to bang on the door and scream. The woman then looked through the peephole,
but the children were gone, and the road was completely empty.
The woman moved houses and never took part in Halloween ever again.
This is the creepy story about the dad.
There was a little girl named Leah who always had nightmares every night.
She always woke up sweating and scared.
One night she was sleeping and she was having a nightmare.
It was about a group of 5 men
trying to chase her down and kill her.
She then woke up screaming and sweating like never before. Her dad then heard her screaming,
and he then came into her room.
Leah then stared at him with a surprised face. He then sat on her bed
and said, "What's wrong, sweetie? Is everything okay?"
Leah was speechless and confused.
Her dad then said, "It's okay, everyone has nightmares."
Leah then let out a terrifying scream. She jumped out of bed and couldn't believe her dad was here.
Because her dad died in a car crash 6 months ago.
This is the creepy story about the daughter.
There was a mother who had a 5-year-old daughter named Kate.
The little girl had a constant habit of asking her mom if she was pretty.
The mother always replied, "Of course you're pretty,"
even though she was tired of answering the same question.
One day the mother took her daughter down for a walk by the river.
Kate then stared into the water and asked her mom if she was pretty. The mother was so annoyed with answering the same question, she lost her temper and in a blind rage,
she pushed her own daughter into the river.
The little girl was unable to swim,
and within moments she sunk to the bottom and died.
When the mother realized what she did, she was overcome with regret. However, she did not want to go to jail
and told the police that Kate slipped
and fell into the water.
A few years later, she got pregnant and gave birth to another child.
She named her Kate to honor her dead daughter.
One day, the mother found the little girl staring at herself in the mirror.
"Mommy, do you think I'm pretty?" said Kate. "Of course you're pretty," replied the mother. The little girl then looked up at her mother and said,
"If you thought I was so pretty, then why did you push me into the river?"
This is the creepy story about the bedroom mirror.
One day a girl named Emma came home from school.
She got into a nasty argument with her mother and then stormed upstairs.
When she got in her room, she happened to glance at the mirror
And she saw a face staring back at her. Emma then jumped back in fear. The face she was staring at was hers, but it wasn't.
Her face was very dirty and her hair was messy.
Emma then said, "Who are you?"
But the reflection remained silent.
Emma then reached out and touched the mirror, and the girl in the mirror reached out and touched it as well.
Their fingers then touched.
"Get lost," Emma shouted. "Go back to where you came from."
All of a sudden, the reflection's hand grabbed Emma's wrist.
And dragged her into the mirror.
When Emma woke up, she found herself in a deserted dark forest.
She saw strange animals in a weird green mist. She didn't know where she was or how to get out. She then sat down and began crying.
Meanwhile, in Emma's room,
A girl was sitting on her bed smiling from ear to ear, brushing her hair and cleaning her face. Then a woman's voice said, "Emma, dinner's ready."
when the girl got downstairs,
The woman said, "You look very happy now."
the girl then said, "I suppose I am."
This is a scary story about the human game.
One day, a young boy went to an amusement park with his parents.
He was going on rides with his parents all day. His parents went to go get food and told him to wait at the table.
The boy waited and waited, but they never came back.
The young boy began to get worried, and he went to the place where they were getting food. But they weren't there.
He then searched the whole park for them, but they were nowhere in sight.
He began asking people if they saw his parents, but nobody seemed to care.
The boy then saw a closed game,
And decided to knock on the door on the side. Suddenly, as he knocked,
the door slowly cracked open.
he went inside and saw something he wishes he'd never seen.
His mom and dad were nailed to a wall full of balloons dead,
Their bodies were filled with darts.
and the two of them were completely cut open.
The boy tried to help them, but it was no use.
He then told one of the workers and they called the police. When the police arrived,
They had no idea what to make of it, and had no idea who did it.
the young boy was then put in a foster home.
And not a day went by.
He didn't think about how his dead parents looked on that wall.
This is the scary story about the mother.
In Russia, there was a husband and wife who lived happily together.
The couple was deeply in love. After they got married, the mother became pregnant and gave birth to a healthy baby boy.
But during the childbirth, something went terribly wrong and the mother died.
The husband was devastated. He didn't know how to take care of the baby on his own, so he hired an old woman to look after it. But then things began to get very strange.
During the day, the baby cried all day and refused to eat any food.
Nothing the old woman did for the child calmed it down.
But during the night, the baby would get quiet and fall asleep.
Silently and peacefully. The baby's behavior was very weird.
So the old woman stayed up all night to watch the baby and get to the bottom of it.
Just after midnight, the old woman heard footsteps going into the baby's room,
The old woman then peeked through the doorway.
and what she saw filled her with fear.
The dead mother was standing there in the darkness.
Kneeling beside the cradle, breastfeeding the baby. The old woman screamed, and the husband came rushing into the room.
The mother disappeared when the father got there.
And when the husband checked on the baby,
It laid there dead.
this is the story about the luxury hotel.
A mother and daughter are traveling Europe together.
When they arrived in Paris, the mother booked the luxury hotel.
The mother wasn't feeling good, so she went to bed early.
The daughter was worried, so she went to the pharmacy to get some medicine.
What should have taken the daughter 10 minutes,
Took her 4 hours, mainly because she didn't speak any French.
when she got back to the hotel room,
The room was completely empty. It was as if her mother disappeared into thin air.
in fact, the whole room looked completely different.
The carpet, the curtains, the bed, the patterns,
The bed was made and looked like nobody ever slept in it.
even their luggage was nowhere to be found.
The daughter went into the hallway and stopped the cleaning lady.
And she asked where her mother was. The lady stared at her confused. In fact, the entire hotel staff denied ever seeing the mother or daughter before. They even said they had no record of them checking in,
She then ran to the embassy.
and told the officials what happened.
They didn't believe her.
In fact, they thought her mother never existed and that the daughter must be crazy,
They then sent the girl to a mental hospital.
where she died years later completely insane. This is the scary story about the homeowner.
One day, a young man was doing some yard work for a little extra money.
When he noticed a homeowner watching him from the window. Now this wasn't weird at all, but what was weird though, was how every time the young man looked up at the homeowner just disappeared. The young man started to get annoyed
So he decided to knock on the front door.
and asked the homeowner, "Why you keep looking at me?"
He knocked, but no one answered.
He kept knocking and knocking, but nobody answered. There was a person walking by and she said,
"Hey kid, what are you doing?"
the young man said, "I'm doing this person's yard work and they keep looking at me through the window." "That's impossible," said the woman.
The lady who lived there died years ago and nobody moved in ever since. The young man then got a chill down his spine.
As the woman who was walking walked away,
He turned around and saw the creepy woman in the window waving at him.
this is the story story about the motorcycle ride.
There was a boyfriend and girlfriend riding on a motorcycle going over 100 miles an hour.
The girlfriend was saying to slow down because she was scared. The boyfriend then said it's okay.
Just give me a hug and tell me you love me. The girlfriend then said I love you and gave him a hug. The boyfriend then said take my helmet off and put it on. It's bothering me. The next day in the paper, it said that a motorcycle crashed into a building because of brake failure.
2 people were on the motorcycle but only 1 survived. The truth was halfway down the road,
The boyfriend realized that his brakes broke,
but he didn't want to scare his girlfriend, so instead he had her say
that she loved him, and then gave her his helmet, knowing he would die without it, and that she would survive.
This is the scary story about the friend's house.
There was a girl named Brittany who was going over her friend's house.
This was the first time she ever went over her friend's house because her friend just always came over her house.
When Brittany got there, her friend opened the door,
And they then went up to her friend's room.
they were just hanging out and talking for a bit.
When Brittany's friend asked her if she wanted anything to drink, Brittany said yes.
When her friend got back to the room, she had a glass of soda for Brittany,
Brittany took a couple sips,
and then continued to talk to her friend.
but a couple minutes later, Brittany started to feel lightheaded.
She then told her friend that she doesn't feel too good.
Her friend then said, I know, it'll all be over quickly.
Then Brittany passed out. When Brittany woke up, she was tied to a table.
With duct tape over her mouth.
Her friend's whole family was standing over her smiling. Her friend then said to her, "We are delighted to have you for dinner. I promise it'll be over quickly." Then the whole family jumped on Brittany and began to eat her alive.
This is the scary story about the berries.
There were 2 friends named Ed and Chris who were going for a walk in the woods one day.
They had been walking for hours.
Ed then came across a berry bush and said, "Chris, let's eat these. I'm hungry."
Chris looked at him and said no. They are probably poisonous. Ed said no they're not, you're just paranoid.
And took a handful and ate them.
Chris laughed and kept walking.
But about 30 minutes later, Ed started to tell Chris he wasn't feeling too good.
Chris looked at him and said stop joking.
But right when he said that, Ed collapsed to the ground.
Chris then ran over to Ed.
Ed's eyes were bloodshot and his face was twisted.
Ed was dead. Chris couldn't believe it. He couldn't even call for help because he did not bring a phone with him.
Kristen ran home as fast as he could and told his parents what just happened.
They then called the cops.
When the cops arrived, Chris led them to Ed's body.
It turned out Ed ate very poisonous berries and he died.
Chris felt sick to his stomach because he was just a second away from eating those berries too.
This is the scary story about the screaming.
One night, a kid named Jesse was lying in his room, playing on his phone.
When he heard a weird noise coming from his door, he swore it was his mom screaming,
But he just ignored it and kept playing on his phone. Later that night, when Jesse was about to go to bed,
right when he was about to fall asleep.
he heard his mom screaming again. It was a very loud, piercing scream, and she was scratching on the door.
Jesse was completely terrified and did not know what to do. But Jesse wasn't terrified because his mom was screaming and scratching at the door.
He was terrified because he killed his mom the day before.
This is the creepy story about the sleeping kid.
There was a 9th grade math class in school one day.
Halfway through the lesson,
Everyone noticed that there was one boy asleep.
so instead of waking him up,
They all started throwing pencils at him and writing things on his face with Sharpie until the teacher noticed and told him to stop.
she then went over to the boy who was sleeping and tried to wake him up.
But no matter how hard she shook him, the boy never woke up.
The teacher then called the nurse down to her classroom.
When the nurse got there, she noticed that the boy was not breathing,
She then checked for a pulse,
and she couldn't get one. The boy was then rushed to the hospital.
and a couple minutes later, he was pronounced dead. They said the cause of his death was from him choking on his gum.
But the most messed up part was the classmates were writing and throwing stuff at the dead boy's body.
This is the scary story about the wine.
There was a married couple who loved wine
They loved wine so much.
that they bought multiple wine barrels for themselves.
It was the best tasting wine that either of them ever had.
The couple always invited friends over,
To try the wine, and they too thought it was the best wine ever.
but one night after the couple finished a barrel of wine
They tried moving it,
and realized that it was extremely heavy for an empty barrel of wine.
so the couple opened the lid, and what they saw inside made them freeze.
There was a dead body inside, all moldy and stained with wine.
The couple then opened up every other barrel.
And to their surprise, there was a dead body in each one.
This whole time, the couple's favorite wine.
Had a dead, decomposing body in it.
This is the creepy story about the burger spot.
There was a boy named Mikey who loved this local burger spot near his house.
Every day he would go and get a burger and enjoyed it a lot. There was something about it that he loved, and no other burger tasted like it.
One day after school, he went to the burger spot.
And to Mikey's surprise, it was closed. This was the first time he had ever seen it closed.
He was very disappointed and began to walk home. Later that night, he was watching TV,
and on the news, they said they caught a serial killer in the area and was selling burgers and using the remains of his victims in his meat.
when the news showed the burger spot,
Mikey immediately puked.
it was the burger spot that he went to every day. And this whole time, Mikey had been eating the meat of dead people.
This is the scary story about the playhouse.
There was an elementary school out at recess one day.
They were playing a whole bunch of games. Towards the end of recess, 10 kids decided to play hide and go seek.
The girl who was it covered her eyes.
Counted to 100, then began to look for everyone.
The girl had a very hard time finding anybody,
She checked every single place on the playground.
except for the playhouse.
When the girl It opened the door, she screamed at what she saw.
Inside the playhouse were the dead, lifeless bodies of everybody playing hide and go seek.
The police were then called, and there was a huge investigation, but they found no answers.
Nobody knows how the kids died, or who or what killed them. To this day, it remains an open case mystery.
This is the scary story about the walk.
There was a boy named Ben who went for a walk in the woods.
He then picked a spot and sat down to eat some of the snacks that he brought with him.
He then got a call from his mom.
She was asking how the walk was and telling him that dinner was ready and he should come home.
Ben was about to reply when he saw a big grizzly bear come out from out of the bushes.
Ben dropped his phone as the bear jumped at him.
Ben's mom was screaming through the phone, saying, "Ben, what is going on?"
But all she could hear was her son's desperate cries
and chilling screams as he was being ripped apart by a grizzly bear piece by piece.
This is the scary story about the crack.
There was a 10th grade history class in school one day.
They were watching a movie, then after they finished it, they had to take a test on it.
When they finished the movie, they began the test.
It was super quiet in the classroom, and one kid decided to crack his neck.
It was super loud and it made everybody giggle.
So this kid named Kevin decided to crack his neck also to make the class laugh. But when Kevin cracked his neck,
His body went limp.
and he fell to the floor lying there motionless.
Everybody in the class turned around to see what just happened.
But not one person had a clue.
The teacher then called an ambulance, but when they got there, it was already too late
Kevin was already dead.
from accidentally snapping his own neck.
This is the scary story about the hacker.
There was a man named Alex who was a hacker.
One night he was trying to hack some stranger's computer, and when he finally did,
He granted himself access to the computer's webcam. Alex then saw a girl sitting in the computer chair crying.
she looked very scared and Alex knew something was wrong. Then suddenly a man came up behind the girl.
And started rubbing her head. Then he took out a knife and slit the girl's throat.
The man then dropped the knife and ran out of the room.
Alex watched in horror as this girl choked on her own blood, dying in front of him.
Alex couldn't even call the police because what he was doing was very illegal.
All Alex could do was watch this poor girl die slowly in front of him.